You'd think when a country goes to war, the story from its leaders would be clear, right? Consistent. But with the conflict in Iran, that was not the case. The official statements were almost immediately at odds with news reports and even with high-ranking officials. So we're going to break down this war of words, where the truth itself seemed to be the first casualty.
So the whole thing really kicks off with this very strange claim from President Trump. He tells his supporters that some former president, he wouldn't say who, called him up and said, "I wish I did it," kind of like a secret endorsement with a little presidential jealousy mixed in. But right away, that story raised a big question.
And yeah, that's the obvious question, isn't it? Which former president are we talking about here? I mean, there's not a huge list to choose from. Well, here's the thing. Reporters did what you'd expect and started making calls. And it turns out, spokespeople for all 4 living former presidents, we're talking Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Biden, all said, nope, that conversation never happened. So right out of the gate, you see the pattern. An official statement gets immediately contradicted by the facts on the ground. And this pattern, well, it just keeps popping up.
But hey, this wasn't just about some weird, alleged phone call. Oh no, the contradictions went way deeper than that, cutting right to the heart of the intelligence and the very reason given for the war in the first place. For instance, when Iran retaliated against some U.S. allies in the Gulf, President Trump's story was that his administration was totally blindsided. He kept saying they were shocked and that nobody expected that.
But while the official line was one of complete surprise, a Reuters report, citing sources inside the administration, said the exact opposite. According to that report, Trump was warned that this was a likely, if not probable, response from Iran.
And here's another one for you. When a reporter asked if Iran was laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz, a super critical shipping lane, the president basically gave a verbal shrug, suggesting maybe it wasn't even happening.
But you guessed it, the reporting told a very different story. The New York Times, citing U.S. officials, the actual people who would know this stuff, was reporting that yes, Iran was in fact laying mines. It wasn't a mystery to them at all.
But maybe the most powerful contradiction didn't come from an anonymous source or a journalist. It came from inside the House, from a high-level official appointed by Trump himself who resigned over the whole thing.
Let me introduce you to Joe Kent. Now, this guy wasn't some deep state bureaucrat. He was a loyalist, a former MAGA congressional candidate who Trump had handpicked to be the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. He was very much on the team.
Which is exactly why his resignation letter was such a bombshell. In it, he says he cannot support the war because, and this is the key part, in his expert view, Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. And you have to understand, that phrase, imminent threat, isn't just political jargon. It's the whole legal basis for going to war in the first place. So for the administration's own counterterrorism director to publicly say that threat didn't exist, well, that basically pulls the rug out from under the entire premise of the war.
So how did the president respond to this fundamental challenge from his own intelligence official? Not by debating the facts. It was a personal attack. I always thought he was weak.
So if the war wasn't based on a verified imminent threat, what was it based on? Well, this is where a really strange theme started to emerge from the administration. The idea that this was all based on intuition, on a feeling. Time and time again, when officials were pushed for a solid reason, they didn't really point to hard evidence. Instead, the answer that kept coming back was about a feeling. It started with simple things like, I felt strongly about that.
And then it got even more explicit. Aides were actually explaining the decision-making by saying the president just had a feeling that Iran was going to strike.
And it all culminated in this really extraordinary statement from President Trump himself. When he was asked how he'd know the war was over, his answer wasn't about strategy or military goals. It was just, when I feel it.
When you run major policy based on feelings instead of facts, it creates a lot of confusion. And that confusion was on full display for everybody to see, especially when officials were pressed for even simple details.
Get this one moment. A reporter asks a pretty straightforward question about attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Trump passes the question to J.D. Vance, who then tries to pass it to Marco Rubio before Vance finally gives an answer that's just completely wrong. He talks about an embassy in Iran, a country where the U.S. hasn't even had an embassy for over 40 years. It was just chaotic.
And that same uncertainty surrounded the biggest question of all, how long is this going to last? Publicly, President Trump was calling it a little excursion that would be over in 4 to 5 weeks.
But an Axios report, again, citing sources inside the administration and among our allies, was painting a very different picture, a war that could drag on for months.
And while officials seemed to have trouble giving a clear picture, Americans were feeling a very real consequence every time they went to the gas station. Since the first strike, average gas prices had shot up by 27% across the country.
So, amid all the conflicting reports, the resignations, the unanswered questions, the president was asked if he was afraid this could become another Vietnam. His answer was absolute, unequivocal. No, I'm not afraid of anything.
So, where does all this leave us? Well, we're in a situation where the official story from the government is constantly at odds with reporting, from both inside and outside. And it kind of puts the burden on us to sort the facts from the feelings. When the stories we're being told just don't add up, how are we supposed to figure out what's actually going on?